Good morning. Again, I ask those of you who are coming in now, please, to find your seats quickly so that we can begin this award session. I'm David Cook, current AAPT past president, and by virtue of that office, chair of the awards committee, which explains why I'm here at this point. The Klopsteg Award and 4 Distinguished Service Awards will be presented in this session. Before introducing our first recipient, however, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record for those of you who were here at the award session yesterday. I want to remind you again that recipients of AAPT awards are selected by the awards committee from nominations submitted by members of the organization and a few other individuals. You can find a description of each of our awards and instructions for submitting nominations on the AAPT website, aapt.org. Go to the Programs tab and select the item Awards underneath that tab, and those instructions will come up. Nominations can be submitted at any time, and once submitted, a nomination remains in our hopper for 5 years before moving into the expired category. Final selection of recipients for a particular meeting is typically made at the meeting immediately prior to the meeting at which the award will be presented. I urge you to look at those descriptions on the AAPT website and take steps to nominate any individuals whom you feel would be worthy recipients of one of those awards. Members of the awards committee, 4 of us cannot possibly be aware of all of the individuals within our organization who might be worthy of an award, and we depend very critically on nominations. Please see that as one of your responsibilities to this organization. Now moving on to the Klopsteg Award. Established in 1990 and named in memory of Paul Klopsteg, he's an American physicist, one of the founders of AAPT, and AAPT president from 1953 to 1954. The Klopsteg Memorial Lecture Award recognizes outstanding communication of the excitement of contemporary physics to the general public. I invite James Hansen, please, to join me on the podium. This summer, the Klopsteg Award is presented to James Hansen, who works at the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York City. Dr. Hansen is recognized for his skill in communicating his work on global climate change to the general public. As you can read in the citation in the on-site guide, Dr. Hansen has made substantial contributions to our understanding of global climate change and has also played roles in influencing legislation in the U.S. Congress and in significantly communicating awareness of the threats of climate change to the general public. I'm pleased and honored to present to you, James Hansen, the 2011 Klopsteg Memorial Lecture Award. The full award consists of a plaque or a citation, a certificate, and a check. Klopsteg lecture is titled Halting, Human-Made Climate Change, the Case for Young People and Nature.
Thank you. Is this working? Can you hear me?
Yep.
No, it's not working. So you have to turn this one off?
Closer.
Okay, is it working now? Okay, how about now? Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you. The case for young people in nature. The situation is that if we do not take steps to stabilize climate, it will be a case of intergenerational injustice. That is not what I pushed. Try this. Okay. Okay, I think I got it. And yet, the status is that there continues to be a big gap between what is understood about global warming and what is known about global warming. Understood by the relevant scientific community and what is known by the people who need to know, and that's the public. I used to say the public and policymakers, but what I've learned in the last several years is a lot of policymakers actually understand the situation, but they're simply they don't have enough gumption to take the actions that are needed to deal with it. Because the truth is, we have a planetary crisis, and yet the public is not aware of that. The reason that we can have this situation of having an emergency, and yet it's not obvious, is because of the inertia of the climate system. The ocean is 4 kilometers deep, the ice sheets are 2 or 3 kilometers thick, and they don't respond quickly to forcings that we apply to them. But that inertia is not our friend on the long run, because once they do start to respond, you can get to a situation where you pass tipping points in which the dynamics of the system begins to take over, and it's too late to change the forcing. For example, if an ice sheet begins to disintegrate and slide down the slope into the ocean, well, you can reduce the greenhouse gases then, but you're not going to stop the ice sheet from disintegrating. So that's an example of a tipping point. And that's an irreversible process on any time scale that we can imagine. It takes thousands of years for an ice sheet to grow by snowfall piling up. And similarly, another irreversible process is extermination of species. And humans are putting pressure on different species in a number of different ways. I remember when I was a 9-year-old boy and started to deliver the Omaha World Herald, at the bottom of the page, at the bottom of the front page, they would have this tally on the number of whooping cranes that had arrived in the wildlife refuge in Texas. The number of whooping cranes had decreased to 15 in the early 1940s. Mainly because people were shooting them and the habitat was being reduced. But when they made laws to make it a crime, it does seem that we may have saved that species. They got into the 20s and then the 30s, and now there are a few hundred whooping cranes. And but there's still, until recently, there was still just this one flyway that ended in Texas. So they're trying, but that's a little dangerous to have just one nesting ground for them. So they're trying to establish another one in the eastern United States. And so they have this little light plane which is training some of the whooping cranes to follow migration paths to end, I think, in Florida. Well, that's one species, and maybe we can save that species, but there are millions of species. And, well, here's another one. This is the armadillo. This guy has been around for more than 50 million years. Compare that to how long humans have been on this planet. He's a survivor, and he's, I think, not going to have any trouble with global warming. But I got an email from a man in Arkansas who said, every year, these armadillos were moving several miles north. I guess he was seeing them as roadkill on the highway that he drives all the time. And that's not surprising, because for the last several decades, the average temperature, if you average the temperature over a decade, so you remove a lot of the variability, then what you see is that a given temperature line is moving poleward at a rate of about 35 to 40 miles per decade. So 3 or 4 miles per year on the average. And some species, like this one, can migrate that fast, but others can't migrate that fast. And this rate of climate change, rate of warming, is unprecedented. as far as we know, in the Earth's history. And once that total movement of the climate zones becomes substantial relative to the size of the zone in which a species can survive, you can drive a species to extinction. They don't have air conditioners to change to the climate that they can survive in. And we know that in the Earth's history there have been global warmings of several degrees Celsius, which drove to extinction a substantial fraction of the species on the planet. And then over hundreds of thousands and millions of years, new species evolve. But again, that's a time scale which we can't imagine. On any time scale that humans can imagine, it would be a much more desolate planet if we drive a substantial fraction to extinction. And the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, estimates that if we stay on business as usual, we will commit 20 to 40% of the species on the planet to extinction by the end of this century, if we stay on business as usual.